I have been asked that I should speak about intra-Afghan peace negotiations, prospects and challenges. I think the 29th February agreement, it is probably the most important post 9/11 development after the Bonn Agreement and the subsequent adoption of the Afghan constitution. It reverses one of the fatal mistakes by the United States of lumping the Taliban together with Al-Qaeda, declaring them as terrorists and thereby literally closing the door for any reconciliation in Afghanistan. The Taliban have always been part of the Afghan political landscape, and in a sense, the 29th February agreement accords that important recognition. One has to give credit to the Taliban for their tenacity in maintaining their struggle and their demand for withdrawal of foreign troops, which now the US has conceded in exchange for a Taliban commitment not to allow territory under their control to be used by hostile forces hostile to the US interests. Other steps outlined in the agreement include, everybody knows, intra-Afghan dialogue, formation of a government, reduction of violence, in particular ceasefire. Now, the situation appears to be moving somewhat haltingly towards peace. At times, one gets the impression that the Afghan parties do not appear to accord the priority which ought to be given to peace. They instead accord priority to their narrow interests for retaining power. Nonetheless, there are hopeful signs. First, I would say that violence has visibly decreased. There are sporadic bomb blasts here and there, but mostly that's the work of the errant group Daesh or Islamic State, which remains a big challenge and which will try to take advantage of any delay or any hiccups in the reconciliation process. They are a group who have no qualms in killing children and women in the name of religion. The Taliban themselves, they have been very scrupulous in avoiding to target the Americans or the other NATO forces. Second, as you have mentioned, the internal development has been positive with the understanding between Ghani and Abdullah, the latter being nominated to lead the government side in an intra-Afghan dialogue. Third, the US so far appears to be very keen to push for progress in this intra-Afghan dialogue for some sort of reconciliation, which could justify its decision to withdraw. And that would allow, of course, President Trump to take advantage, declare that he has brought to an end America's longest war. Fourthly, I would say that with the reduction of violence, uncertainty has lessened. Fears of imminent collapse of Kabul and the Taliban apprehension which was there that in case there is some move towards peace, then the Taliban rank and file will disperse. They have attenuated, and that should basically reinforce confidence in both sides, that is the government as well as the Taliban, to engage in the intra-Afghan dialogue and work towards reconciliation. There is also no visible effort on the part of these parties for territorial grab, which was suspected at one time during this period of relative calm. Next, I would say that the Taliban have toned down their ideological rhetoric, and that is most visible in the change in their position on gender issues. There is, of course, the question of enforcement of Sharia and then return to the Islamic emirate, but we will have to see whether the Taliban continue with some kind of rigid interpretation of their position, or they show pragmatism. After all, the new leadership or part of the leadership, like Mullah Brother or Tayyib Agha or Stanikzai, they are people who have traveled the world, they have now seen the world, and they are no longer the product of very narrow circumstances which the earlier leadership was in the early 1990s. Next, I would say that the fears that the external spoilers, particularly India, will muddy the waters. Well, partly all these outside players, they are preoccupied with the corona pandemic, but they do not seem to be creating issues and creating problems. The rhetoric against the Taliban has softened. Much of it owes to the fact that the United States has reached out to the Taliban and has now an agreement with them. It appears that finally a degree of war fatigue is coming into play. If it is so, then it's a healthy development. The Afghan people appears to show it, this fatigue. The world is showing it. The mood in the United States and in Pakistan decidedly favors reduction of violence, even if they remain committed to stand by the groups and by the parties that they have supported earlier. There is now a ring of credibility in Pakistan's own assertion that it no longer has favorites in Afghanistan. Earlier, there used to be doubts about this position, and that Pakistan wants to build trust with all ethnic groups. There is also better realization within Pakistan that Pakistan's policy itself has suffered on account of the fact that it fell into the Afghan ethnic divide. Now, these were some hopeful signs. What are the challenges? Challenges are very many. To start with, if you look at the history of the last 4 decades of conflict has never been resolved by the Afghans themselves during these 4 decades. The nature of conflict changed because the emergence of new powerful groups such as the Taliban, or by outside intervention such as in 2001. This time, will the Afghans defy this history? We have yet to see. Then you see, let me mention that you had mentioned in the introduction the book. One book that I had written was Untying the Afghan Knot, almost 30 years ago. It came out in 1991. And the last paragraph, which was a kind of a conclusion, in that paragraph I had said that besides a positive role of outside powers, peace in Afghanistan will depend on the emergence of a powerful coalition of Afghans themselves capable of resisting and countering forces of extremism and violence. This was literally the last sentence of that book. That coalition has not yet emerged. Today, of course, this kind of a coalition, by definition, must first and foremost bridge the ethnic divide that I have referred to, and it must, of course, include the Taliban themselves. Then, as far as the other challenges, of course, apart from the format of the dialogue and the issue of release of prisoners, towards which some progress is being made. There is the question of the substance of the negotiations, which includes, of course, the constitutional issues, how to conform it with the Taliban idea of Islamic Emirate, the structure of the government, Taliban status in territories under their control. It is difficult to see that either Ghani or the present setup in Kabul is going to accede to their being replaced by an interim government, or they're accepting a new election. So we have to see how the Afghans overcome these obstacles. For any constitutional changes and for bringing about a structural change in the government, the Taliban will need allies and very deft political skills. They have shown some political skills, no doubt, in negotiating with the Americans, but we have to see how they work with their own countrymen, the other parties. They may push for Loy Jirga, but as we all know, for Loy Jirga also there has to be some kind of an agreement on a consensus, which Loy Jirgas then put their seal of approval. Another model is that of Gulbuddin Hikmatyar, but Gulbuddin Hikmatyar reconciled only when he had lost militarily. He agreed to work within the political metrics in Kabul. The Taliban would, of course, demand a much better position than that. The Taliban will have to be accommodated by the others in areas of their control. I would say similar to the way influence of warlords dominating various regions of Afghanistan has been accommodated. The best hope is that all factions will accord de facto legitimacy to ground realities. A unitary form of government is not feasible under the present circumstances. The Taliban should retain and should be allowed to consolidate their control in areas of their influence. Kabul could have a weak but high-profile arrangement similar to the arrangement that the agreement had produced, with Taliban participation and corresponding attenuation of the Afghan National Army and intelligence, their hold over the city. That has to also weaken. These needed adjustments, they literally are like a minefield, but still they can be navigated. As I said, that the future shape of Afghan national government is one of the challenges. Economy will be another big challenge, but if there is progress towards reconciliation, then I think the international assistance will continue to be available to Afghanistan, at least for some time. Outside players can pose a challenge if they try to pull the Afghan factions away from reconciliation in their own selfish interests. The US here will have to play a critical role, but I may say that within the US still There are elements in the US military establishment who persist in hoping that they would be able to maintain a military footprint in the country. If the US insists on that, how will that be accommodated? Again, it will be a challenge. So there are many challenges, and any factor can very easily derail the process, which to move forward requires a very determined effort on the part of all parties, the Afghan leaders themselves. So far, these leaders, in my view, have failed the test of pulling their nation out of a fratricidal civil war, even though Afghan themselves have shown most remarkable stamina in fighting outside military presence. Now, lastly, I would say, what is Pakistan's role in all this? What Pakistan does and doesn't do is important. There is no doubt about it. But experience shows that whatever role Pakistan plays, it should be done prudently and with a degree of circumspection, without appearing to be pushing or seeking a role proactively, which will only arouse suspicions. Pakistan should largely respond to what the US and what the Afghan parties themselves want. I sometimes feel that Afghans, if they are left alone by the outsiders, they have a better chance of putting their act together and coming to some kind of an agreement. One of the personal experiences I had was in 1992, when the Tanzimat, they were left alone, but under a lot of pressure to come to some kind of agreement, and they did. Here, of course, I would like to welcome the appointment of Ambassador Mohammad Sadiq. He's a good friend, and we had worked together in Brussels and at the ministry. I have the highest regard for his competence. His contacts in Kabul, developed during his stay as ambassador, are incomparable. He will provide, I'm sure, very sound advice to our civil and also military leadership. I wish him success, because in his success lies our best interest. We need peace in Afghanistan, first and foremost, for the equanimity of our own society. Secondly, we want to see that the Afghan territory is not used by elements hostile to Pakistan, such as RAW, the Indian operators, etc. Apart from these two factors, peace will bring economic benefits to the region, but I may caution that it is not going to be a path to any El Dorado. We sometimes have very exaggerated notions about what will happen if there is peace, and sometimes that a great economic benefit will flow. There will be peace will generate some significant economic activity, but as we know that the Afghan markets are limited, the Central Asian markets are already saturated, everybody is there. When talking about economy, I think Pakistan will have to address the Afghan desire for a land route for trade with India. At present, any gesture of this kind to India is not feasible. But down the road, Pakistan may examine this matter in the context of helping peace and stability in Afghanistan, in the context of reinforcing Afghan interest in trade through Pakistan, routes to Central Asia, and it might also create a stake in the stability of the region, an Indian stake in the stability of the region. I would like to say that As I said, that the Afghan market is limited, and transit trade with India is not going to dislodge the advantage of proximity that Pakistan enjoys. Nothing can really offset that. Lastly, I would say that Pakistan must shed its fears, such as are often underpinned in talks about a two-front situation and quest for a strategic depth. In its policy towards Afghanistan, Pakistan must proceed with a certain confidence. Nothing can offset the advantage of shared geography and history, population overlap, and unique people-to-people interaction, which is almost a daily phenomena between the two countries. Thank you very much. These are my initial remarks.